Good morning, friends. We have an interesting talk today by the next episode of Hattie's journey in her career as a doctor. This one is titled Being Flexible Enough to Start Again. So, Hattie, ready?
Okay, I don't know where I am. Am I supposed to look at me or you? Let's have a gallery view. Yeah, do you know this is the fifth talk I've given to this group? I couldn't believe it when I was looking back. But I'd done Preparing for a Doctor's Life, which was about sort of undergraduate life, the early years of work, which were when you're training in hospitals and such like, and then becoming a serious GP, which was the first job that I got after training as a general practitioner. And then I did actually being a GP. And now I'm doing being flexible enough to start again, because I had that job, my first job in general practice in Runcorn in Cheshire, and it was really quite different from how practice became afterwards. But because I got divorced, and because I knew something about psychology, I realised that I needed to do things one by one. So the divorce takes ages, but stopping your job doesn't take more than 6 months. You have to give notice. And then I started working as a locum. So that means that I was standing in for other doctors, and mostly in general practice, but also because I had lots of qualifications in family planning, I could do family planning clinics in Warrington, Widnes, and various other places. Even in the winter, I remember once I was driving along one of those narrow roads between wonderful Victorian houses, and I skidded sideways. Oh dear, it was just the ice on the road. I didn't touch anything, thank goodness. But then, so job change, and then financial situation changed. Not that I cared much, because in fact GPs earn quite enough. And then later moving house. So I knew from my psychology training, etc., that it was best to tackle these one by one during my time off. And this was, I don't know if you've ever heard of the Holmes-Rahe stress score. Right, okay. So I, knowing that, I just did things one at a time. So I have taken you in my other talks from 1984 to 1991, based as a GP in Runcorn, married, then divorced, and I learned basic counselling skills in an evening class. Just before becoming a GP in Runcorn, my mum had died. She had been 17 years on dialysis. And during that time, she took a great interest in the patient support group and started the National Federation of Kidney Patients Associations. And in a way, it was lovely to still be involved with that. Even after she died, I was asked to give, the Ruth Lupton Award and to help look at the applicants and go to the conferences. And the conferences she started were absolutely brilliant, because nothing had ever been done like it before. It was a conference for all people involved in kidney problems. So you had consultants, nurses, didn't quite go as far as the cleaners, but it was dietitians, the technicians who ran the machines, the people who organised the service for connecting the patients to whoever they needed. The receptionists were absolutely wonderful, and everybody knew them, and they stayed in their jobs. You got to know each other. It was really lovely. Anyway, so that had happened, and so I continued for a few years to have that link with sort of patient stroke medical world. Anyway, I took a year off between one job and another. And during that year, I thought, well, what shall I do? You know, I need to enjoy. I know divorce is going to be tough, but I've got a life to live. So I did an Open University course in music, just the basics, and that was easy because I did know quite a bit of music. But my God, when it got to arranging music for 4-part harmony, hey, come on, I'm getting to be a little mini Bach. No, I found that tough, but it was fun. And I started a counselling course proper because it was run by something called the Central School of Counselling and Therapy, based in London. And the thing was, they did the counselling courses in various cities around the country. So I thought, well, if I start in Liverpool, I can continue somewhere else afterwards. So I did that. And the first year was about theory and practicing little mini counselling sessions between us. So we'd pair up in threes, and the third person would be an observer. So many minutes this way, so many minutes that way. So I really did like that. It was once a week going up to Liverpool, and then you wrote all about it during the week. That was good. That was good. So that was 91, and then in 92, I moved down south to my dad's house in Corsham in Wiltshire, and that was really great to have time with him and to get to know him a bit better, and I felt like a daughter, and you know, back home, as it were. It was a different house than I'd been brought up in because he'd moved, and I committed myself to an A-level in music then, and that was a 1-year course at Filton College. Excellent. I just cannot tell you how brilliant that department was. In the end, there was 11 hours of music teaching each week of one sort or another. And at the end of that year, I mean, I knew the stuff we'd been taught really quite well. And so, and I, as a mature student, I clicked into study skills and practiced them. And I actually didn't need to revise the third term's information at all. It was all buzzing around in my head, and I started playing the oboe again and a piano, and you had to get it to grade 6 and grade 8, and you know, I felt really buzzing that year. Fantastic. And also, because I was down here, I could start doing family planning clinics and hospital locums and GP locums in the Bristol area, and get to know what sort of things might be available, and something about the life here and social life, playing music, meeting new people. And I was also, the other continuity in the medical world was I joined AGUDA, which is the Association of General Practice in urban deprived areas. I say is, actually we closed it down in 1994 sadly, but it did last over a decade, and we had conferences. And this time that I had off between Runcorn and Bristol, I did locums, and I made a talk called Bridging the Gap. So perhaps that was the first kind of way of giving talks which were more personal, because otherwise you'd be giving talks to your colleagues about medical topics and diabetes or high blood pressure, but that was more a personal one. So then I started applying for a Bristol practice in general practice, and I can't tell you, after living with my dad for a year, I mean, it was fabulous. I loved it. But I did find a shared house in North Bristol, and I lived in one room. And I mean, can you imagine? We had a 3-bedroomed house with an office each in Frodsham, near Runcorn, and I was shrinking down. And so in this one bedroom, not only me, but my cat, and she went in and out the window onto a sloping roof, and boxes of extremely well organised stuff under the bed, under the desk. You could walk in, like, you've probably seen these TV programmes of somebody who hoards stuff. Well, it was a bit like that. But anyway, I functioned there. I got my exercise book, and I got all the adverts from the British Medical Journal, and I stuck them in, and I started applying for general practice. And I think it took over 40 different applications to, and in those days, I have to admit, an application did not take 1 or 2 days. Nowadays, your application process for quite high level jobs can take people 1 or 2 days, because they've got to make an individual application, and they've got to, the demands on interviewees are mad. I'm not saying they're mad in general practice, but they are mad in other kind of university jobs, for instance, and in teaching jobs. So then I had a near miss once. There were just 2 of us left to choose at Lawrence Hill, and the partners decided that it was in for a dig to have trial by sherry, which used to be the phrase. So they had trial at supper. So we both came along to supper with all the partners and some of their wives, I guess. And it was a very nice event, and I was not chosen, but there you go. And then I found Malago surgery and felt very comfortable with my sort of butterfly experience in life, and we all were quite open and sharing and very useful to each other. And that practice was quite in transition. So I replaced everyone was full-time in those days. There were nothing part-time, hardly ever. Job share, hardly ever. So I was full-time, and I replaced a guy, and he had left to do something or other. And I thought he was a lovely guy, so I knew that I was replacing somebody who was very nice. And then no sooner had I been appointed, I hadn't started there yet, then somebody else wanted to leave and go and specialise in a very special speciality of medicine. And so that involved me in helping to choose the next partner, really, as soon as I arrived. And in fact, we chose job share, and I'm still in touch with them because we got on very well together. So by that time, in Runcorn, I had been the only woman. So there were 4 guys and me, all full-time. Here, it was much more even. So there was already a woman in the practice. I joined her, and then the job share was 1 woman and 1 man. So we were 2.5 women and 1.5 men. Only 1.5, yeah. And so there was all this discussion at the time about the sex ratio of GPs, and we were taught that 1/3 of patients wanted to choose the sex of their GPs and minded about it, and out of that 1/3, 1/3 wanted to see one-third wanted to see the opposite sex, and 2/3 wanted to see the same sex. It was really interesting. You have to subdivide the questions in order to find out what it was that they wanted about choosing the sex of the GP. I don't know if those questions are ever asked or researched these days, but there we go. We participated in that. So then I was able to buy a house, and that was in Clifton Wood. It was a terrace overlooking the docks, and over there was the SS Great Britain. And then, of course, the Matthew arrived. So quite soon after I bought the house, I had a housewarming, invited everybody along. Oh, little did I know, I happened to have chosen the night when the Matthew was being launched and paraded up and down the docks, and they had lights rotating on the sails. It was an amazing evening. I didn't know. I had no idea. When my friends coming to the party, one of the receptionists turned up with picnic chairs and a picnic basket, and I thought, hey, are you moving in? And on the terraces outside my house, there were 9 terraces. It's so steep, 52 degrees, and they set up their little sort of picnic home, and I didn't know. And then, come and have a look at the Matthew. It's parading. So that was a very lovely social bonding time for the practice and my new friends there. So then I'm going to talk a little bit about the organisation of the practice, because the government was very much encouraging people not to be single-handed, very infra-dig. You had to be part of a group, and that would help your medical knowledge develop and your feel-good factor, really, I think. So we had partners meetings every month and developed the idea of having an executive partner pretty soon after I came. When I arrived, all the decisions were made by consensus, and I said, excuse me, I would like decisions to be made here not by consensus but by majority, because if I object to something, I don't want to have to shut up and not have a vote or not say anything. I want to be able to say where I'm coming from and to say, no, I don't agree with it, and yet participate in the majority vote so that we get on with business. So that was new. And we got in expert facilitators, which was a very good thing, a very interesting thing, because then we were taught and understood about teamwork and, you know, what facilitates things and how to improve the feel-good factor but run efficiently. So a couple of little examples. I introduced an idea of a thank you book. So I got a couple of scrapbooks, and the letters and emails and cards that we got from patients saying thank you, you know, that was really lovely, thanks to the receptionists, they welcomed me so well, or whatever, you know, whatever was done nicely, and put them in the book. It wasn't looked at very often, but it was there, and you could show visitors and, you know, put a compliment in that you might have received, and you thought, oh, that's lovely, I'd like to share that with everybody. And then another very simple thing that I did as executive partner, I was the first executive partner. God knows, I feel like not terribly organised, but anyway, I landed it. Off we went with the system. And I said, how come the heating is on every day of the week? And the heating was on, hi David, the heating was on all day Saturday. We only saw patients in the morning, and it was on all day Sunday to keep the building warm. Hang on a minute. So we saved pounds just, you know, not having heating on when we didn't really need it. And later on, for another reason, we were able to fund solar panels. So the practice now has solar panels and the income from them. Another thing we did innovatively was, well, partly pushed into it, but the car park at the back of the building was really small, and of course doctors got priority, but then receptionists said, well, why can't we park there as well? You know, we work here as well. Quite right. So doctors were kind of, you know, nudged into cycling and started that quite a bit, especially in the summer. And then we thought, okay, so encourage that a bit more. And instead of bringing your cars in, let's buy a little smart car. So we bought a diddy little smart car and shoved that in the corner of the car park so that anybody who was doing visits would pop out in that. And that worked very well. And I suppose that rather transitioned into, instead of doing all your own house visits, so, you know, you might need to see, or think you needed to see 3 or 4 patients of yours because we had individual lists. So you might think, off I go on my house visits now. So the whole building empties of GPs and you're all out on your house visits for an hour and a half or something before lunch. But actually, gradually that transitioned to one person doing the phone calls for the emergencies of the day and building up a house visit list. So they were managing the house visits. And that was okay, especially if you could, I mean, you knew who was doing it. So you'd say, can you go and see Mrs. Bloggs? This is the problem and I want to find out that. Or you'd say, actually, I will just see Mrs. Bloggs, and if you would see the others of mine, I would be grateful. Something like that. So your kind of system of organisation gradually changed. And I had valued personal lists tremendously. I still do. And I bet you all do too. You like to see the same doctor. So, well, I guess you do. You build up some kind of rapport. You don't have to be tense before you go in because you know who they are, and vice versa. And so in Runcorn we had our own lists, and they had worked hard. Everybody had come in for a couple of weekends to make the transition from group registration to personal registration in Runcorn. They had worked hard at that, and so when I turned up in Malago and they already had personal systems, I was really pleased. Personal lists. What was I going to say next? Oh, pass. part, don't know. So that's part of the organisation. Yes, computers, of course, that increased in use around this time as well. So you're talking about mid-90s, so quite a while ago, and in fact increased so much that even in our lunch break, and I counted 8 minutes for my lunch as quite generous. Otherwise it was just 3 minutes, and you would be sitting again at the computer, and during the lunch hour you'd be looking at blood test results, ticking them off, good, call me, I'll call you, all the kind of different outcomes that you might have from a blood test. And then you would also look at the letters from hospitals and from out-of-hours services, so that you could keep abreast of what was happening with all your patients. And then you'd communicate with other members of staff, file this or chuck that or whatever needed to be done. And then that meant that we gradually intruded on our coffee stroke lunch stroke relax room and had tables round the edge with computers on them. So we would be ferreting around our computers in the relax room. There was still a coffee table and chairs round that, so they could tap you on the shoulder and say, hey, we got some cake here, do you want some? So we still had quite good communication. We did. And then the other thing that I very much wanted, which, because me, I'm Queen Recycler, so I wanted us to develop recycling in the practice. And I have to say, I dropped in the practice 2 or 3 years afterwards, and they still got the recycling going. And I thought, great, some tiny change. Anyhow, so all that. But not only were we intruding on our own relaxed space, we needed more staff. And well, they had to share spaces. So instead of having the office for the deputy practice manager, there were 2 of them in there, and then later on 3 of them in there. And then the practice manager had an assistant, and there were 2 in there as well. So really, things became so computer oriented. Now why did that happen? Well, it's all in the mix, but GPs were paid a reasonable amount, and the government and the royal colleges were interested in trying to improve general practice and show that it was a strong speciality. And the government, there was a campaign from GPs to say, look, some of us work in very deprived areas and it's really tough, and it's a different job than when you're working in Blackheath in London, where everybody's got $500,000 to spare and they've got private health insurance. So the government said, oh yeah, okay, so let's make an allocation for deprived area payments. And we got deprived area payments in South Bristol because of the flats at Redcliffe, which, near the church. And those flats were, well, quite basic. So we got some payment because of that. So I can remember some criteria. One criteria was, did they have access to a phone, or did they have to go out to a phone box? And most people in the Redcliffe flats had to go out to a phone box at that time. Another criterion which affected further south in Bristol, where there were smaller houses, there were terraces and stuff in Bedminster. Another criteria was, did they have an indoor loo? Well, it's unthinkable now, isn't it? Do you know anybody who's got an outdoor loo now? And that's all they've got? So, life has changed. Civilization here has moved on. So we got the deprivation payments with the hope of helping to improve, poorer people's lives, really, because they needed more input. And of course, that's still recognised. Just before that time, I think the Black Report came out either in the late 80s or early 90s. And the Black Report was about, economic differences, health differences, really revealing. Did the government allow it to be published? Ha 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 ha. Oh no. So I'm sure it's published now, but it was extremely controversial when it came out, and so the findings had to be pushed under the government's nose by the Royal Colleges, Royal College of GPs, Royal College of Physicians. So then, having moved electronically, another organisational shift that had to happen was, what's going to happen to all the paper records? Because that's where all our patient records were, on paper, in those brown envelopes. And they were stacked alphabetically. Every practice had their different system, some rotating, and we had shelves. And as it got more and more cramped, as we introduced more shelves, the receptionists and ourselves, we had a big think. And we actually created a separate little room by making a mini extension so that we could get one of those machines that rotates and brings you the next lot of notes like that. And then we called for the notes, and the receptionist prepared them, pulled them out before the surgery and put them on our desks. And then, as time went on, we realised that we didn't actually very often access the paper notes anymore because things had gone electronic. And also, so we said to the receptionists, you're relieved for some of your job. Please, would you, see if you agree to this, don't pull all the notes out for us, but would you be able to respond if we just phoned you and said, please can we have Mrs. Blogg's notes now, because she's in front of me or whatever. Could you please, drop what you're doing and just bring that down to us? And they did agree to that, so that worked well. And what we also realised was the only records we were building up electronically were our own from when we started seeing them. So we realised, and a lot of doctors wanted to do this, and the government started paying us to do it, we needed to summarise the paper records onto the electronic records so that, in summary at least, it was accessible and you knew what issues there had been over the last few years. And you tried to extract the main headings, like what was a major ongoing condition like diabetes or epilepsy or high blood pressure, and what issues were just there in the past and they'd finished or they had been there. So we did do that, and that took quite a lot of hours, and we had the debate, do we pay somebody to do this? Well, then we've got to train them, and they're not necessarily going to be medical. Do we employ medical students to do it? Yes, we did that for a while. Do we pay ourselves to do it? Oh my God, that's going to be 4 hours a week extra. When are we going to do it? At home, at work, at the end of the day? All this kind of thing. And of course there were demands increasing all the time. GPs could do that. GPs could do that. GPs could do that. So then the other problem, of course, about computers in consultations is it becomes impersonal. You lose the eye contact, you lose the flow, the person-to-person thing. The trust is not the same when you've got a computer between you. I hated that. So I participated in a little bit of research to try to find out in what ways the computer was intrusive. And one thing that really hit me was how much it prolonged the consultation time. I'm not a skilled typist. I've got to put something in for the next doctor because this is where it's going to be. Doctor's handwriting, that might have wasted a bit of time, but every consultation, it wasn't just the handwriting that might have been difficult to read. I had to fill, I had to type. And then as time went on, the government started paying us for individual targets. I don't know if you were subject to those. And, we were supposed to invite older people to have a checkup. Oh, in addition to all the rest of our work. Oh, thank you very much. Damn, how are we going to do this then? So people developed a template. So not only did you see the person about that problem, but you also had to inquire about smoking and weight and exercise. So, and you had to fill the boxes in so that later on we could do a computer analysis to see how many % of those people had been offered a health check, and then the government would pay you according to the work you'd done. And Now, the health check wasn't actually a terrifically useful thing. It was a waste of time overall, because as long as you're seeing people when they identify that they're not feeling well or ill, then go ahead and do it. And the older people's health checks, though people loved them and thought that they were very, oh, that's great, I've had a health check, I'm all right. Bullshit. The majority of the people were fine, and just on the odd occasion you might pick something up. Anyhow, more detailed targets came out, and I'll tell you that I believe that some of them were very useful. For instance, I think our diabetes healthcare improved enormously, because it meant that you had a list of all the people who had diagnosis of diabetes, and you actively called them in to check up on them, and that was a useful thing, because then you could change medication, reduce, increase, add some treatment for their blood pressure, because heart disease is prominent in diabetes. So truly the diabetes care did improve, and epilepsy care improved, and certain other things definitely did improve. One of the difficult areas that I found, because I was kind of running this chronic disease program, was learning difficulties, and they started paying us to have annual checkups with people who had a diagnosis of learning difficulties or some other kind of disability, quite major disability, and it proved very difficult, because it's much more efficient to see people in the practice. So you would invite them to come to the practice, and the nurses and I discussed this, and one of the nurses became more of a sort of interested in speciality in this kind of area. And so we'd invite them in with a carer, probably. So that's 2 people's time. And then they would see the nurse for most of the checkup, and then they would spend a few minutes with the doctor if there was a need. So that was 4 people involved, the 2, the carer and the patient, and maybe a nurse and doctor. And it's hard when you're a carer for somebody with a disability. It is hard just to tack on an extra little appointment. Could be a couple of miles away from your house, and quite a lot of people did not want to do that. So that meant, how are we going to do the checkups? How are we going to get the pay for that time? We've got to go to their houses. Now, this wasn't extra pay. This, the government would take GP's pay down and add it back if you did the work. So you had to account for the work in order to make up the pay. So I'm sorry to talk about money, but it does matter. And it's a tremendous motivator for GPs. Really tremendous. So for instance, for minor surgery, we started getting paid for each of the mini operations that we did. And the conditions were that your surgical space had to be inspected. It had to be clean enough. It had to be, provide rescue. If somebody had a side effect from the local anaesthetic, you had to have all the equipment for an emergency treatment of that, and so on. So, standards for minor surgery in general practices improved. And so this is a bit about the target things. And then as time went on, the nurses wanted to get involved, and they wanted to improve their speciality training. There were practice nurse trainings, and they did have some qualifications. And as time went on, they started doing little specialised qualifications in, like, asthma, so they could help with the asthma clinic. Diabetes, they could help with the diabetes clinic. And then as time went on, and we tried to provide a different kind of GP service, we had telephone calls from our patients, and not just a few at the end of the surgery. Would you phone Mrs. Bloggs about, or would you, just a list of maybe 3 or 4 people to telephone after surgery. We realised, or many GPs realised, that a lot of people attending surgery probably didn't need to come to the surgery. I think it's about 70% of the problems that were presented in a face-to-face surgery probably could have been solved on the telephone. So a lot of doctors started doing actual telephone clinics. So So patients would phone in, and the telephone doctor would be on the phone, able to access all their records, but not necessarily know them, because it wasn't personalised lists anymore. It was creeping in that it wasn't really personalised. And then they would say, yeah, actually, we do need to see you for that. So would you come at such and such a time? And we had certain appointments blocked, available to see somebody that day or the day after if they wished. And then we had to ask the nurses to provide some of this kind of appointment as well, because it might have been a dressing they actually needed, or it might have been skin treatment that they needed, something which a nurse was specialising in. So the nurses had to adapt to what the practice needed. They couldn't just run their own surgery and just book their own patients in. Please would they make space for the people who phoned in and needed to be seen by a nurse that day. It was very nice having nurses in the practice, and one thing that I missed greatly when they decided that they weren't going to do it anymore, initially we celebrated each person's birthdays, and we brought in birthday cake and presents, and it was quite fun. And then we also did Christmas gifts, and this, for instance, is a Christmas gift from the practice nurses. I'm still wearing it and love it. Once I got a little clock. Why? Oh, I'm always running late.
Yeah.
That's my friend Sandra laughing, chuckling there. Anyhow, so then and the nurses sort of started getting a bit kind of independent. We're kind of doing our own stuff now, so they also all the training that they did, you know, these little courses in asthma and high blood pressure and such like, and their knowledge increased, and they wanted more pay because of that. We had paid for the training, and then of course they were better trained, so they wanted to go elsewhere. So we had a slight turnover of practice nurses. So I remember the first two nurses we had, well, they stayed a long time and they were absolutely brilliant and we loved them. But the nurses who came later got the extra training and off they went. So there was more turnover of nurses than there was of doctors. But there were definite improvements as the government put pressure on us to work in different ways. What's the time? 11:40. Well, I just want to go on a bit about education and teaching, because there was quite a lot of education available in Bristol. Being a city, it wasn't too far to travel. We had a local group of GPs and we got speakers in. I should think each term we probably had 4 meetings, something like that. But we chose the speakers as GPs and they were relevant, whereas up in Runcorn the GPs participated in the hospital lectures, and so they were hospital doctors being taught. So that was quite different. Every month we had an in-house training session, so we would decide what we needed to know about, and then one of us would, you know, prep it and teach it, and that was very good. But again, you know, you had to make time for that, really. I absolutely loved reading the British Medical Journal and nearly always managed an hour on a Sunday. And then if you practice quick reading skills, then you can read quite a lot of information in an hour, really. And I might get through 3 editions of the British Medical Journal if I'd missed out on some, just sort of picking out what was really relevant and reading the summaries and maybe getting 1 or 2 extra facts. And what I loved about it, it's very intellectually stimulating, but also very useful. I mean, within 2 or 3 weeks, you would have a patient along, blah, 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 and you think, I was reading about that the other day. Wow, you know, I know what that is. Okay, and I know what tests to do. And so you'd get new knowledge and help patients with their problems and make some progress. Very exciting, I found that. Then the local medical committee, they ran GP education as well. So you would meet other GPs, not just the local GPs, but other Bristol GPs and South Gloss GPs. And I've got a friendship from there this chap, South American, and he worked in East Bristol. And of course, with my Latin American and Bolivian connection, we hit it off, so we're now friends. So that's nice. And then the medical school would run education as well. They had a research group, and our practice was quite into research. So we participated in research in our practice, which other GPs were doing in the area as well. So it was great to get a GP perspective on medical research, not just hospital perspective. That I was attending, I think maybe we had a couple of times a year a meeting with the research group, and how to do it. And again, that got regulated, all this admin stuff. You've got to do this and you've got to do that. But, it does have to be regulated. You have to know that your patients are aware that they're participating in research, what it's about. Are they happy to have their names and address kept in the practice? Promise that we won't give them anywhere else. That kind of information and that kind of formality, absolutely essential. Absolutely essential. The other thing that the medical school did was gradually, over the years, just increased the number of medical students that they asked us to teach. So we started teaching fourth year medical students. So they were fairly knowledgeable, knew how to talk to patients, get an understanding about the details of a pain or the details of medication, and understand their interactions and such like. And then, could we take some third year medical students, please? Not in the same way, but if you could just teach them half day a week for 6 weeks. Anyway, and then second years, and then first years. So gradually we divided up the teaching amongst ourselves. I paired up with another GP for the fourth years, and we did talk about swapping round so that we would have more interest or fresh eyes or something. But we decided, hang on a minute, we've got used to it, we know what we're doing, we know who to communicate with in the medical school if there's problems, and we would also be taught by the medical school. It was like teaching the teachers. So we would go to certain training sessions that related to the students that we were teaching. And I think it was better that way to build up your expertise and your knowledge. So I was fourth year medical students. Just looking backwards again, in Runcorn, we did have a monthly session where we taught each other. And the medical school was in Liverpool. And I was a member of the Royal College of GPs, and we had a monthly meeting as well. And they asked me to teach in the university about emergencies in general practice. And when I got there, there were half a dozen doctors, and they were already well qualified. And I was asked to teach them about emergencies, and they were all training in general practice. They were all from Saudi Arabia, because Saudi Arabia wanted to have some GPs. So they'd sent a handful up to the University of Liverpool, and please would we teach them. So I took the medical bag along and talked through the different kind of emergencies that you might get in general practice. And then we also had Dr. Smythe, Tom Smythe, he became quite adept and quite knowledgeable about drug abuse, and he worked closely with the Bristol Drugs Project, and he would teach about drug use and treatment in general practice and at different places. So we developed various kinds of expertise ourselves. We tried having work experience people in our practice because, it's nice if you could offer some work experience to people in grammar schools or secondary schools to come and see what general practice might be like. Would they enjoy it, etc. It was actually very difficult to arrange. And we did have a bad experience about confidentiality. Some of them just don't understand what confidentiality is at that age. So that was a bit tricky. But we did offer some kinds of placements, and we did try quite hard on that one. And it was a great experience for them. It was so fun to follow a doctor around on a day, or to be present in a consultation. Okay, after the patient had been requested, was this okay? And we also realised to ask a patient as they walked into the room, here, we've got this person sitting in, is that okay? That's too late. So people were informed as they arrived by the receptionist, Dr. So-and-so's got somebody sitting in today. They are a qualified doctor or a medical student or a school student. Is this okay or not? They were given time to have a think about it and whether they would agree to it. So I think that our understanding about how to teach people was actually quite thorough and well carried out. But then I would blow my own trumpet, wouldn't I? So I think that's enough for today, really. And I'm afraid it does mean that I've got more for later. So any questions, and we'll explore the emotional impact of the changes in general practice, I'm sure.
Always more for later. Mary.
Hattie, would you comment, because I think doctors are required regularly to fill in 2 self-assessment forms. One goes to the GMC and one goes to the practice manager. Is that useful or just a chore?
Okay, so the appraisal system. Well, I mean, that was really, it was mooted even before Harold Shipman, but Harold Shipman really brought it home to us that, you have to be assessed and vetted by other people. And in North America, you have to do your exams every so often to prove that you're still capable. And GPs were a bit proud in the UK, saying, well, I'm working every day, I know what I'm doing. Well, I'm sorry, but that's not very realistic. It's much better if other people know what you're doing as well. So I agree, some kind of appraisal is useful. I don't know what system they've got now, I'm afraid, because I've been retired 10 years. But and a self-assessment form is really not foolproof, really, is it? Anybody can fill a self-assessment form, but the appraisal system was such that you provided evidence for the courses that you'd been on. You had then to provide evidence that you had reflected on those courses, and that could include case studies where the information from that course had been useful, so that you would make a little note of a case study. But the appraisal, after all that sort of electronic guff first of all you sent it in on paper, and then we went more electronic, so everything was on forms on the electronics, and I can't say I enjoyed that. I found it horrible, and I never remembered to do it. And some GPs who are very organised said, oh, I do it at the end of every day. What? Anyway, so for me, I would be looking at the next letter or the next result or the next plan or the prescribing or the whatever. But no, they would just make sure that they had logged their appraisal stuff that had to be logged at the end of the day. And I'm not that organised. So I agreed with that. And obviously these forms, Mary, must be along those lines. And I would say useful, but I'm not so sure about, I don't know what these forms look like. So I just think self-appraisal is a bit about self-aggrandizement.
Any views on Dr. Google?
Doctor who?
Google.
Oh, Dr. Google. You have to be careful what sources you're looking at. And I trust the NHS sources. The NHS A to Z is actually incredibly good. You can look up, for instance, you could look up indigestion under I, A for acid reflux, and GORD, which is gastroesophageal reflux disease. So they've done a tremendously good presentation. They start with simple writing so that you're not freaked out by what you're reading. in the first place about these symptoms, because my concern often is that people will read stuff and self-refer and say, but I've got this and I've got that and I've got the other, so I must therefore have leukemia or whatever. And so my concern is that people freak out at sometimes what they read, but that's why I like the NHS thing. And for instance, if you've got a painful knee, you can look up a bit of physio to do, which isn't going to be harmful, and you can get going with that even before you see any kind of specialist.
Yeah, because I've heard doctors. I'm sorry, Sue. Do carry on.
You're still
You're muted, Sue.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I thought you'd finished.
No, you carry on, my dear. I ramble on.
Mine was more, well, not a question, Hattie. It was a comment, really. My practice used to be Gaywood House, which then became part of what Malago became part of, which is the bridge. And those days when you actually had a doctor who knew you are long gone. I mean, you don't even now have a doctor. I mean, it's really, really difficult to get even a telephone consultation with a doctor, and you will have tests advised by one doctor, and another doctor will give you the results, and they won't know. I mean, you speak to a doctor about ongoing conditions that you've had for 50 years, and they don't know you. They don't seem to have the notes for more than, well, they don't have notes. They don't. I mean, I had a ridiculous situation where I actually did get to talk to a GP about, because I was really worried. My eczema has got really, really bad. And I didn't want to keep on year after year taking too much. Anyway, that's not the point. The point was that this doctor who I had never seen, who didn't seem to grasp that this was something I'd been living with for a long while and it wasn't you, sent me a prescription for an increased dosage when I'd asked how I could sort of reduce it, and sent me a link to an article that said that it was all due to my eating too much sugar. This doctor didn't even discuss my diet, had never met me, didn't see me, knew nothing about my weight or my diet, but sent me this link about eating too much sugar. And I think you get very a doctor is a completely different beast now to what it was just a few years ago, and it's not reassuring. And a friend of mine commented, you end up going to the walk-in centre, you end up going to 111, and then you get referred to the GP because the walk-in, and it's an absolute nightmare at the moment. And this has gone on, it started before, it's made worse by lockdown, but it started before. So it must look very strange to you.
It does. I get totally exasperated by the absolute waste of time. It's a waste of emotional energy, it's a waste of time. And as you say, doctors are so more idiosyncratic because they don't seem to have a common training which gives them some kind of base to go from. And it is absolutely frustrating. And people are ordering far more tests than they used to. I mean, okay, we did order a lot of tests, and that definitely increased dramatically whilst I was practicing. But I see tests ordered now just in case, or because, or whatever. But the rationality seems to have changed quite a bit, and as doctors are trained now, they are encouraged to think creatively about the impact that health care might have on patients. And unfortunately, there are some doctors who, like Harold Shipman, have still got this need for power. I'll tell them. And it is quite inbuilt. I did spot it in a chap who I then discovered had started medical school, and I thought, shit, do I write to the GMC and say, not this one, please, please, please don't train him. He is one of these power people. He had done some crooked deals that I knew of, and it just freaked me out to think that he was going to become a doctor. Luckily, somebody failed him and he wasn't. So I was very grateful for that. They spotted it. But it's this thing that, you know, I can tell you, honestly, I do know about this. I'll send you a link, all right? Ray, are you chairing? Muted.
David.
Yeah, great stuff, Hattie. So this overlaps with what Susan was saying and what you said about Google
Somebody's
and.
background noise is on, please.
Sorry, I'm in a cafe. I'll speak closer to the microphone. I was just reading an article from a who said that he was obsessively concerned about not getting dementia, right? So
Not getting
there's
dementia?
Sorry?
Not getting dementia?
It's not working, is it? Let me just turn on my proper microphone for a moment, if I can find it. Okay, so I've changed the microphone. Can you hear me now?
Except
Sorry?
the speaker. Can you put mute on except the speaker?
Sorry, I can't hear you now, Hattie. Not sure. So I'll try and say what it is. What he was saying was that. Can you hear me?
It's the background noise is much
wait.
bigger.
Too much.
Okay,
Yeah.
I'll stop.
Oh, thank you, David. Sorry, it was you. Yeah. Christopher.
Yeah, two things I wanted to comment on. One was 111. It was only after I think I'd used it the second time that I realized, you know, they ask you for all this information when you dial, but they don't actually pass that information on to the person who calls you back. And I can remember getting cross with people because I assumed they, you know it. And then no, they hadn't, you know, and you'd have thought all this stuff was being put into the computer, it would be fed out at the other end of the person who got to call you back. Rather than just saying, oh, yes, somebody needs to call them back, you know, crazy. And yeah, just wanted to say twice when the GP had a student there. I mean, once I'd been asked if I'd talk about my mental health, and it turned out one of the students was my cousin's son who was studying medicine at Bristol, which I was fine with. That didn't worry me. But I thought the other time was so typical. You know, you go along to the doctor because you've got a hemorrhoid the size of a golf ball, and, you know, you need to be examined. And of course, there's a student being shown as well. But hey, they've got to learn somehow. But yeah.
Thank you, Christopher, for sharing that little gem.
Yes, I'm sure that, you know, made your day, hasn't it?
But you are right, and it's quite a delicate issue when inquiring of your patients if they could be gently examined by a medical student who has, you know, never done that before. And in general practice, when we were teaching fourth years, we had them attached for a couple of weeks at a time. So it was far better than just coming for the odd half day here and there. You got to know them, they got to know you, and you could shape your surgery and clinic around what was needed for your patients, not specifically what was needed for that medical student. Yeah. Is David back and able to speak yet?
Hattie, I put it in the chat.
Yes, I see. So it is about dementia. Good diet, exercise and sleep. My concern is that you don't even know your GP. How would you ever get this advice? Right, let me scroll up. David was reading about a guy who was afraid of ever getting dementia and researched it almost obsessively. His conclusion was there was not much you could do once you have symptoms, but 3 things you could do to slow it or prevent it. And how would you get that advice? Well, yeah. I suppose, is that your question? If you don't see the same GP each time, how are you going to get advice that you can actually engage with? Everybody knows public health advice is do more exercise, eat less fat, don't be obese, but it doesn't work that way because we're human beings. So, David, what else? The question is it?
Well, precisely, that's my question. What could medical practices do so that people are getting advice before they get symptoms and ill? What can we do to improve what's the next step up for improving the general health of the population so that people are genuinely healthy rather than going to see a doctor when they've got a problem? Is there something that you can imagine that could be the next level of?
Well, I think there's 2 ways of looking at it. One is pills and potions and technology, which is not my scene, but the other is helping people with motivation about looking after themselves and getting self-esteem and taking care over themselves. But that tends to apparently work better for people who are better off. So unfortunately, we're still the health gap between the rich and poor is still increasing as the economic gap increases. And there are certain strategies that have really helped health. In Leeds, I saw Michael Mosley illustrated their input for childhood obesity recently, and basically their childhood obesity program consists of not using the word obesity at all, but talking about healthy eating with parents and the children, and things like not having the telly on whilst you're eating, so that you're actually engaging with each other and laughing and sharing knowledge with each other at a meal time or whenever. That decreased childhood obesity until the start of the pandemic. It took several years, but it worked. Other things that have worked are the Head Start program, but that's not to do with GPs. You see, the Head Start program is investing in kids when they're young and their parents and helping parenting, and that has really worked. And then the government cuts come along and they decide that it's not a program they're going to continue, or it has to be farmed out to a private company or something like that. It's very sad to see that what works is often not adopted.
I hate to say this, but apart from having had to complain once, well, I didn't have to complain, but I did. But I found my GP practice have been really good, and the receptionists now who vet us before they put us through to a doctor have been incredibly good. But I gathered when I made my complaint and said how, it was just one doctor I had a problem with. I was told, do you mind if I pass that on? Because the receptionist gets so much abuse from people. But it is changed times, and I think we need, having moved and being with a new practice, I have discovered they seem to have a pill for everything, but so far that seems to be, I'm still alive and I'm kicking. So, they can't have gone too far wrong.
Thank you. Ruth, would you like to say something about your experience of general practice?
You're muted,
So
Ruth.
you're muted.
No, I feel very pessimistic about it, I'm afraid. But getting GP services has become so hard, and yeah, it's a very hard job to do, and doesn't seem to be the will to get it right, or the staff. Yeah.
I think anybody with access difficulties certainly finds getting hold of GPs bloody hard. You know, using a mobile phone or having to wait. GPs seem quite disconnected from the services that they need to know about to link you with. They may not really know about them and understand them at all. They just tell you about them. It's a shame.
Yes, I see. That did remind me that one of the things I have found with my, telephone appointments, I always ask them to call the landline, but the number of them who call the mobile, and I do find with my hearing loss that I find it much more difficult to hear the mobile than I do the landlines.
Yeah.
But anyway, you all gathered that I tell them this when they phone and get them to.
I think we have to stick up for ourselves, Christopher, and that's why one of the things that I do these days is to give talks about deafness. And I talk to social groups, volunteers. I went to Bishopsworth Job Centre. I'm happy to give talks about deafness to anybody. And during lockdown, it was online to Age UK and also for the Centre for Deaf and Hard of Hearing People, because it affects 1 in 6 of us as we get older. So it really is a common problem. And the youngsters these days speak very fast. They insert quite a lot of unnecessary words. I know there's a word for that, but I can't remember what it is. But and so and lots of extra words that don't mean anything, don't contribute to the meaning of the sentence. But I think they speak fast, and anybody with beards and moustache needs to trim them. So there's quite a lot of learning and understanding. Oh, Chris, you're chuckling.
Well, I did. I mean, I did the classic one recently with a deaf friend. We were on the bus, and I had my mask on, and I said something to her, and of course she couldn't, and I think, it was trying to listen to David earlier on. I think unless you experience it, the fact that I can hear the background noise and what they're saying, but I can't hear David, it is so frustrating, and it seems so weird, it's counterintuitive, but for some reason that's what happens. So anyway, yes, I must start wearing my hearing aids more often, I think.
Yeah, because actually what happens is your brain gets used to hearing stuff.
Yeah.
Better practice. It's like muscles.
Yes. Well, it's like when I wore them out once, I thought, oh, I can hear the birds cheeping, and I could hear the wind rustling through the trees. Anyway, right. Well, I don't know what's happened to Ray. So it's about 12:10. Should we call? Is there anything anybody else wants to ask Hattie before I hand over to Patsy to praise her for what she's done?
Sounds good.
Yeah.
I need to tell you about next week. We've got an unusual one. This is about cold water swimming by Emma Pusil. I don't know Emma, but I don't think she does these talks very often, and she's looking forward very much to doing it anyway. So I hope we get lots of you coming to listen to that. I think it's a horrible idea, cold water swimming, but still. Yeah.
Yes.
Ruth, say your bit.
But does I like cold water swimming? Not at the moment, I don't.
Well, it was like, I don't know if anybody's saw the documentary on Tom Daly when he was doing this crazy challenge, but part of that was cold water swimming.
All right.
And the training beforehand, he was told, you mustn't jump in because, the shock of it actually closes you down and you drown, which is why there are so many corpses floating around the floating harbour. But that's a cheerful note to end on. Anyway, thank you very much, Hattie. That was very entertaining as usual. I am so glad you've still got enough notes for a further talk, and I'm sure Patsy will be booking you in very soon. So
Thank you.
and I think it could actually be very good, considering the age of most of us, if we actually at some stage had a talk about deafness, and hearing loss.
All right then.
Yeah, so that's 2 more, Patsy. I hope that's enough.
I think it's more than that, actually.
Yeah. Anyway.